Greetings and welcome to session 4, and we're continuing with the whole journey of discovering our identity, discovering who we're created to be and how we're going to become that. Specifically in this session, we're continuing the whole idea of being valued, that we need to understand our own value, that we need to understand that we are loved, that there is a God in heaven who designed and created us in his own image, and all of the things that we talked about in the last session. And now there's more to come about that whole creative process that just sends us the message again and again that you are incredibly valuable, that God took his time over you, that God put some, if you like to kind of put it in human language, God put some thought into your design, into who you were going to be, into what you were going to look like and what attributes you were going to carry in terms of your character and your abilities and your gifts and all of those sorts of things, and that you actually, just because of what God has said and what God has done, you are incredibly valuable. And you might not have discovered that yet. You might still be struggling with that idea. And I hope that this session will help you a little more in getting the revelation, actually, of just how awesome you are, that what God has done in creating you and how valuable you are, regardless of what anybody else might have to say about it. So here we go. We discovered in the last session that humankind is kind of singled out from the rest of creation for some fairly significant reasons. But the making process, the creating process, there's some wonderful things to discover about all of that as well. Let me read you this. This is from Psalm 139. I'm going to read from verse 13. For you formed, this is the psalmist talking to God, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. The psalmist tells us that God formed our innermost parts, our inward being. God formed, if you like, what's on the inside of us, that he put that together. And I want to just have a look at some of the language there and how that helps us to understand just how incredible that is. So first of all, we're talking about the formation of inward parts. What does that mean, the inward parts? There's a Hebrew word there, kilyah, which is used 31 times in the Old Testament, and can mean kidney. and you know, that's an interesting observation, that in biblical language, you know, when we say we feel something in our hearts, we're saying that actually we feel that at the very core of us. In biblical language, it's not the heart, it's the gut or the kidneys, or that kind of area, the bowels, that area of the body. You know, I actually feel it down here that this is true, that this is right. So kidney's not too bad a thing to kind of start with, but actually by extension means much more than that. So inmost being, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the heart, the mind, the spirit, the seat of thought and emotion of the inner person. That's what God has done here. He has formed those elements in us, okay, to his design. And let's see the process there. Before the beginning of time, God has designed you, okay? And then when it gets to your part in history, God forms you. God puts that plan into process. He forms you in your mother's womb, and he forms the inner person. He puts the inner you together, and there's all of that, you know, heart, mind, spirit, thoughts, emotions, all of that stuff he molds carefully into being. Okay, so it's not just randomly thrown together, but it's carefully molded into your inner being. And it is described here in the Hebrew language as a kernel, a kernel of wheat. In other words, a seed. That this stuff, this seed of who you are, is carefully formed within your mother's womb in order that when you are born, this seed can start to grow. All of these wonderful bits and pieces that make up the inner you are carefully, constructively put together by God in your mother's womb, like a seed, so that it grows a little bit in the womb, of course, but then at birth it really kind of kicks into that growth path, and all of those things that God has formed in you start to grow in you. That includes your thinking and your emotions, all of those things God has had his hand on, all of the stuff that makes me who I am, all of the stuff that makes up my personality, all of that idea is all handmade by God, put together in your mother's womb, planted there like a seed, to grow, and in the fullness of time to come to birth, to grow even more into something spectacular. And that idea of a seed helps us see and understand there should be growth. That you can see that in children, that that as they grow from birth, as they grow in those very early years, there's all of this learning and developing and growing going on. It's that seed that God has formed inside of them that is starting to come to life and to grow. And as parents, we must be very careful to ensure that growth happens properly, to protect our children, to teach our children, to help them to engage with the purposes of God in their lives and all of that stuff that makes them who they're going to be. And then the psalmist continues, knitted me together. So all of this is going on in the mother's womb. There's the forming of the inner parts. Then there's the knitting together. The word used there, the Hebrew word, is suk, which is used 10 times in the Old Testament, which literally means to anoint. So that which God is forming in the womb, he then anoints. And there's this idea of oils and perfumes and lotions and being poured onto this creation that God is putting together. And that actually this is not just a physical formation here. This is not just a soul being put together in terms of thoughts and emotions and that kind of thing, but there is a whole spiritual thing taking place here where the whole thing is anointed by the power and the presence of God and the hand of God in the womb. It's anointed, and of course this idea of oils and perfumes and everything, very much to do with worship, that this person being created in the womb, this person being knitted together, is anointed, that has a whole special thing about it itself, but is particularly anointed for worship, that actually we are created to be worshipping beings. And it's quite clear in life that if you don't worship God, you'll worship something else. Everybody worships. It might not be God. It might be science, or it might be philosophy, or it might be a football team, or it might be another person, or a false god. Everybody worships something, and that's part of the way that God has made us. But clearly God's intention is that we worship him. And that idea that God gathered all of those important elements, knitted them together in just the right measure, in just the right balance, and then he anoints it. He puts his blessing on it, and there is this calling even in the womb to worship. The psalmist continues, fearfully and wonderfully made. A Hebrew word, yare, there, which means to revere and to respect in terms of the way that we revere and respect God. And God has made us in that kind of image, fearfully and wonderfully made. And in fact, one of the words that my Hebrew dictionary throws out here is awesome. Awesome. And I know in the modern world everything is awesome, particularly if you're young. This is awesome, that is awesome. And actually, generally, it's not that awesome. Here is something that is awesome, that you, as God has put you together in your mother's womb, as he has anointed you and spoken his blessing over you, that you are created to be awesome. That you are created awesome in the womb. And that as you come to birth and as you live your life, the design on your life, the call on your life is to be awesome. That is you. You are awesome. And the idea is that this awesomeness should be a reflection of God, and that as you grow into that awesomeness, that it should honor God, it should give glory to God, and it should reflect God to the world around you, that awesomeness. And here is something that I really love. The psalmist goes on, "My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret. Your eyes saw my unformed substance." That God has been a part of this process right before the beginning of time, that he designed you, and then at your time in history, he starts to create you and put you together in your mother's womb. Here is the thing, and I love this, that there is a time where you exist in this world, in your mother's womb, where the only person that knows about it is God. That before a mother knows that she's pregnant, before there are the signs of pregnancies and that and all of the things that most mothers will tell you that they experienced before they actually knew they were pregnant. Before all of that takes place, that the unformed substance, that as all of the bits and pieces are starting to be brought together to start to form that seed in the womb, that the only person that knows about that is God, that he knew you before anybody else knew you, and he blessed you. He knew you before even your mother knew that you were there, and he blessed you, and he anointed you, and he put some awesomeness in there because he loves you, because he wants your life to be spectacular. He wants his own glory to be reflected in your life. And there's that moment where there's only God who knows, and that's quite incredible. And then here is the thing. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Now, I don't want to get into the whole abortion debate. That's not my purpose here. But if I were to fall down anywhere on that debate, it would be on the side of pro-life. Why would it be on the side of pro-life? Because I don't believe in mistakes. I don't believe God makes mistakes. I don't believe that there are any people alive today who were born as a result of a mistake. I don't believe that there is any baby ever formed in the womb that was there as a mistake, because my Bible tells me that the God of heaven, before the beginning of time and before the beginning of our life, had written the book of our life. That, listen to it, in your book, his book of life, every one of them, every one of what? The days that you formed for me, the days that were formed for me, the days that God had scheduled, the days that God had spoken into being, the days that God had planned, the days that God had decided would be there. All of those days were written in the book. The baby is not formed in the womb without the express will and purpose of God, formed for a purpose, formed with a plan, with days to come. There are no accidents. The conception, the point of conception before God starts to take a hold of that and use it. Okay, who knows what was going on there? But the pregnancy itself is not a mistake, because the living God has done this according to his purpose and his plan. And if you have ever been told you were a mistake, if you've ever been led to believe that you were an unwanted pregnancy, that you were an unplanned pregnancy, I want to tell you, I really don't believe that, because the Bible says that before you came into being, God had planned out every one of your days. The God of heaven, who loves you, who forms you in your mother's womb, who anoints and blesses you, who fills you with awesomeness and calls you into being, has planned a life for you. It's all out there. The days are all out there, planned for you. And the Bible makes it very clear that God has done that with each and every one of us. So there are no mistakes. There are no accidents in God's book. And let me finish with this. He loves you. We're going to come across that phrase a lot as we continue on this journey. But time after time, the Bible tells us about the God who loves us. And, you and I need to really grasp a hold of that fact that we are created, designed and created by the living God, created in his image, put together beautifully in our mother's womb and blessed by him and called out into an awesome life. What is this born out of? This is born out of love. This is born out of the love of God. And we need to understand, we need to get a revelation of this in our hearts, in our minds, in our spirits, something that goes deeper than just the words, and understand that God, out of his great love, has caused us to be, each one of us. And because of that, because he has designed us, because he has created us, put us together, anointed us, blessed us, filled us with awesomeness, because of that, we are valued. We are important. There is something about us, each one of us, which is unique and of incredible worth. And we must not believe the lies of the world, and we must not believe the lies of other people that try to tell us we are worthless and useless, because God says something different. I hope that something of that settles in your spirit, and look forward to seeing you in the next session.